welcome everyone to today's meetup. So I'll just give a short introduction of TCC. So we are a community for content creators and content enthusiasts to connect, learn, and grow. So we do this through two main things. Primarily newsletter, which we send out monthly, and also this TCC Meetup. So the idea of the meetup was to share, like bring in people from various content backgrounds and share their experience of their professional journey. So when we started this out, the idea was that there are a lot of people who are willing to share their learning and insight and help other people. And there are also people who would want to learn more about the industry, but not sure how to go about it. So we thought, this is something that we can do. We have like Ruben knows a few people who are interested, and I also started looking out for people who would be interested in sharing their experience and insights and just help people who want to be helped. So and so far we've done around 14 meetups, if I'm correct. I don't recall the exact numbers, and people have been more than open to do these meetups. So yeah, so today's meetup is on we have Paras Borgohain. So he's gonna talk about his journey as a screenwriter and story consultant. So just a quick introduction of Paras. So he has done a couple of, he has delved in quite a bit of, diverse genres. He's done popular shows for toddlers and complex stories for diverse audience. He has a background in literature and also a diploma in TV production, and he's also graduated in professional screenwriting from UCLA School of Theatre, Film and Television. So he's done the official Indian production of Sesame Street, which is, I think, Gali Gali Sim Sim, if I'm correct. And I'm sure all of us are familiar with that. He's also he's also worked for international global US shows as well. His spec Deepest, Darkest, and How Not to Lie, a contemporary queer-themed epistolary drama, was awarded the Blue Cat Roshan for the best submission from India by and Blue Cat founder Gaudy Hoffman, writer of the Sundance winner Love Lisa, starring his brother Philip Seymour Hoffman. This was also among the top 6% in consideration for the grand prize of the international contest that received more than 4,500 entries. He was also recommended as one of the only 12 writers for the Scriptopalooza Screenwriting Fellowship in 2017 because of this spec. As of early 2023, Paras is writing a screenplay for Motherland, an indie feature for Touch a Life Productions based in Studio City, California. A Hinglish romantic comedy feature for a leading film production house in Mumbai. So that's about Paras. And Paras, more like I've given a bit of introduction from what I know. And now over to you, Ruben, to carry forward this meetup. Ruben, I think you're on mute.
Oops, sorry. So everyone, that's what I was saying. And Paras and I go back a long way. Both of us were studying together in the Institute of Communication. He was doing a different course in film and television. I was doing journalism. Our roommates in the often spoken about hostel of Xavier. So we have a lot of stories to tell, but that's for a different day. Today, I think it's my honor and pleasure to actually host Paras, and he, as you've heard, he's done a lot of interesting stuff, which I myself am very keen to know about. So I mean, I'll just start off first by just setting the record straight, because many people are, including me, are a little clueless about the difference between what is a screenwriter, script writer, screenplay writer. So if you can just maybe, Paras, explain what that is, and then maybe we'll dive into your journey.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me and having thought of me in this regard. It's a real pleasure to connect, and what our experience is worth if you can't share them with people who might learn from it. So thank you. With regard to what those different occupations mean, I think broadly you can say that any piece of narrative in the industry is considered a script in a sense, in a broad sense. And then when you get deeper into the process, there are all kinds of writers in different industries, but I think largely one common sort of classification to go with is that when you start with a story outline. So a lot of people specialize only in drawing out the outline for a story. And so they're called story writers or story editors. Sometimes they take on work that has already been written in the form of an outline or what is called a story treatment. And they sort of come in with their skills to find the gaps and plot holes and to strengthen certain elements of the story. And those are called story doctors. And then you get into what is called the actual script, or some people call it a screenplay, which is the actual blueprint of how things are going to appear on screen, and therefore it's a blueprint for the filmmakers to execute the vision. So it'll be written in a certain format, an industry standard format, whether you call it a final draft or a Caltex or Movie Magic. There's several brands, but they all serve the same function, which is that you have everything very clearly cut out on the page. It's mostly, the standard is 1 page per minute. So you have like a separation of, stage directions, dialogue, a little bit of description here and there. So basically what the film in words is how I'd like to put it. So that's a screenplay. So that is also known as a script. So there is a story and there is a script/screenplay. So those are the two big elements. Some people do both. They see through a project right from the story stage until the final draft of the screenplay. And then the director takes it to another level by getting in the production team involved and calling it a shooting script, where there are actual, camera directions or executional directions for other members of the crew. So I would say story and screenplay are the two big elements.
Okay. It's fairly interesting, especially for an outsider, and it seems very glamorous. And I don't know, probably it is. But it's a lot of, people are always wondering, how do you get a foot in the door? How do you start off in the industry, whether it's film, whether it's television, whether it's OTT? So as a screenwriter, how do you get your foot in the door, and how did you get your foot in the door? What is it that you did to, start off in this industry?
Yeah. So it is, I mean, at least when you're trying to get a foot in the door, it is anything but glamorous, because there's so many established people in the industry that you have to sort of break through to sort of even make yourself be seen or have your presence felt. So I think the first step, even before you set yourself out in the industry and start cold calling people or meeting people or try to find contacts, is that you have to have a body of work to present, because I think that's what ultimately matters. Because I remember, so to illustrate this with my own experiences, when I got out of XIC, where we both studied, I really had no idea where to go. And because at that point I was very clear that I was not, I didn't feel like I wanted to be a film director. I knew that I wanted to be behind the scenes in terms of writing or ideating. And I really didn't have any clue how to go about it. Now, everyone might not get that lucky, but at around that time, I think Balaji Telefilms was looking for new trainees in the creative department to sort of aid their business in terms of taking the storylines forward, because ultimately it's a business. So how do you ensure that the storylines are enough to carry the show for 3 to 5 years and keep the ratings high? So they were looking to hire a lot of associates, junior associates, to help with the story writing and ideation, and even to go on location and sort of watch the process and learn. So eventually they would have a bigger team. And I sort of took that leap of faith. It was a little push from my family also, because I wasn't sure I was ready to do the soaps. But it's the old adage, you've got to start somewhere. So I think, and that's a note for anyone who's aspiring, is that you cannot always expect to start at the level that you're hoping for. It's important to be seen on location with the other colleagues in a certain studio or a production house. So even if it's entry level, just go for it. And once you establish those relationships, you'll find a way to sort of assert what you're good at and be recognized for it and be hired for it. So I took the entrance. I think it was a written test of, like, they're basically testing out how you think in terms of storylines, or how you can make something of anything that's just given to you, a few words, a situation, to get a sense of who you are as a creative person. And then the follow-up was an interview if you cleared the written entrance, which I did. And then in the interview, they just wanted to get a sense of what your plans were and how serious you were. And that's where, it came in really handy that I had some things to show. I actually had like bound copies of things I'd written over the years, even as a kid, to say that, oh, I do write stories. I do have a sense of how screenplays are written, and here's my body of work. And it just showed them, it's not like they sat and read any of that material, but they were like, okay, he's really been at it for years. So this is someone we can hire. And so that was my first footing. And even though I didn't want to stick around long, because I realized that while it was a great learning experience in terms of how things are executed in a certain grind where, the working hours are very, very, they're super hectic. There were days where we would start meetings at 5 in the evening and end at 5 in the morning. That's just how Ekta Kapoor works, for some of you who might have worked with her. But I realized that the material was not something. So it's also very important to then, once you start training, to find and really reflect on what your skills are, what you like doing, because this is an occupation you probably want to carry on with for the rest of your career. So you have to be very sure about what kind of skills you want to build on and enjoy. So that was my first footing. And then once I left Balaji, I had a little stint in nonfiction with Sub TV. They used to have a news channel at that point. So that was surprisingly enjoyable for me, because I was still telling stories, but in a nonfiction way. I had to go out and shoot visual segments and packages, 3 to 5 minutes, on several issues, from, say, housing to mills being shut down in Bombay, to drug addiction, to HIV awareness. So I had to learn how to tell stories in 2 to 3 minutes. But all of this kind of started building on my resume. And I think my big writing break came when Sesame Street launched in India, and Meditech got the contract back in 2005 or 6. I fail to recall. But I joined in season 2. By then, things were already up and running for a season. And I joined as someone who would adapt the original American segments for the Indian show, so that they could be dubbed. And then when the original productions became full on, they were in full swing, then I sort of joined the writing team officially. And so that went on for 7 to 8. So this is like briefly to tell you that within the first 2 years, it was a lot of following my gut in terms of what I wanted to do, and just be very aware of opportunities. But the first most important thing is to not worry about the level you're joining the industry. Even if you're a production assistant, even if you are just holding up time cards at a talk show, it's really important to be in the mix as soon as you can.
Yeah, interesting. You spoke about the industry being having a certain kind of mindset of the way it works, like working late nights and all of that. So obviously there's a certain, and we hear a lot about these parties and this networking circles that happen. So this ability to network and socialize, has it opened doors for you, and do you have any interaction that you've had that has sort of changed or given your career a different direction?
Absolutely. I think that's very important to be sociable, because it's one thing to have a body of work, which is very important. but also to sort of have the presence of mind when you're at a social event to interact with people. And I think it happened when I've been working in India for like a good over 15 years now. But there was a sabbatical that I took. I think that would be the best example to prove how networking and socializing works. When I took a sabbatical in 2018 to study screenwriting at the University of California in Los Angeles. And that can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be America, even if you're in Bombay. As a student during that program, I would make it a point to attend every film festival, especially the ones for new filmmakers and students. And the best part about those kind of events is that it's not just the students that obviously show up. It's also a lot of new filmmakers, some established filmmakers. And it is like one of the capitals of the entertainment industry where Hollywood is, and all of these independent producers are. So they're always looking for new people to connect with. And I remember this one evening at a festival where there was like a 17-year-old kid who just came up to me and one of my colleagues from school, and he was like, "Hey, here's my visiting card. Are you guys here to watch a film? Because I also make films." And that stumped me because I was in my 30s, early 30s, and I hadn't really made anything that I had authored. And there was this guy who came from a family of filmmakers. The mother, his dad, and his grandfather were all filmmakers. They were all there getting a drink. And he told me that he'd made a short film that went on to YouTube and had millions of views within a month. And then so he introduced me to his parents. And while we were talking to his parents, he was still going around the circle, dropping off his visiting card and talking to people. And eventually those people, the family, we struck up a really nice conversation about how we felt about what we just saw inside the theater. And eventually I ended up inviting them over to screen some of the work that I had done over the years. And we bonded, and they started to attend some of the, table reads that I had with the acting students. And they introduced me to someone else. And that person ended up investing in one of my personal projects as a producer. So it started off with someone actually approaching me casually to have a conversation. But I think it could have gone very differently if I sort of, retreated into a shell and became suspicious of this little kid coming up to me and talking about films. It was really nice to sort of open up and listen to him. And he's still making films, and so are his parents, and they're big producers. So yeah, and we're still in touch. So I think it's very nice to make people aware, and that can only happen through conversation and showing up at places and getting over certain inhibitions, because people like to meet other people in the industry.
Correct. And it's not only about starting and striking a conversation, it's also about being receptive to a conversation, right? I think that's also important when you're at these social events. So you spoke about this, about UCLA and obviously the culture that exists at these film festivals in the US. So, and you've also spent some time working there. So, and there's this, in the news now, there's the SAG, there's the strike that has just been called off and things like that. So can you give us a little bit of a background in how the two industries vary from each other and what are your experiences from there?
Okay. So like I said, my first formalized writing professional experience was with Sesame Street. And I think now a lot of shows in India too have adopted that model, which is the writer's room, where you meet at least once or twice a week around a table, and you draw up these index cards with all of your scenes charted out, and you start plot the story together, and then you distribute work between the writers that are in the room. I think that is something that is more prevalent, definitely in the US. And also here, I think what I like, the categorizations are a little bit different from my experience. Like in the Indian film industry, which is predominantly maybe Bollywood or Bombay, let's say there'll be a story writer, there will be a dialogue writer, there are lyric writers for songs, there are screenplay writers, So there are these kind of things. So it's not so much about the genre. To be known by a certain kind of genre that you write is like a secondary thing. But those are the broad categorizations here, and people don't really identify writers by genres or the format so much. Like a film screenplay writer here could also be writing for 5 other soaps on television, on broadcast, and could also be writing a movie for an OTT platform. In the US, however, the way you distinguish one writer from another is very clearly connected to format. So there'll be a half an hour comedy writer, there'll be a half an hour drama writer, there'll be an hour 1 hour drama writer, 1 hour, then there are late night comedy writers. Those are big shows. So you are kind of in a way boxed more in terms of what kind of format you're more comfortable with, whether you're short format, whether you're long format, whether you're more television. Then there are feature writers who are like the ones who write movies. But there isn't so much a distinguishing between, let's say, a screenplay writer and a dialogue writer, because the guy who writes the screenplay is also assumed to be equally skilled at writing the dialogue. So it's sometimes you have co-writers, but essentially it's not the skills that are so separated. Here there are more specializations because we have more elements in our storytelling, I guess. We have songs, so you've got to have someone who writes lyrics. Some people are very good at story structure and plotting, but they are not so good at the spoken word. So then the dialogue writer brings in that sort of little zeal and zing to all the conversations that are happening, memorable lines that people like to quote. So yeah, that in those ways it's different. But I think lately what I've seen is because of the OTT systems and the studio systems also getting a strong foothold in our industry, we are sort of emulating a lot of those formalized writers' rooms and processes from development to execution.
Yeah, you spoke about this, being boxed as a particular type of writer, and I know you started off with Balaji soaps, then doing children's plays, and does that bias or does that boxing happen, and is it very difficult to get out of those boxes? As a writer, personally, one is obviously the outside mindset bias towards you, and one is internally, how do you tell yourself that yes, you can do other types of screenplays?
Yeah, so I think first of all, like, it comes from an awareness of first of all, you take your work out, get your work out into the world, and have someone judge whether you're good for a certain genre or not. You have to be very clear about what is your latest inclination. I mean, there's a saying that you're only as good as your last work. And to a great extent, that's true. So what happens is when, in my case, yes, because after the soaps was just like maybe 2 or 3 months, and then there was years of writing for children and, information-led sort of formats. But so, yeah, it did happen a lot of time when I was up for, through contacts in the industry and just cold calls when, we're looking for writers and we came across your profile. We have this project that is very intensely fiction for adults, but there was a lot of times there's hesitation, but you've only written for children, you've only written for NGOs, you've written for, organizations like UNICEF, and those are corporate films essentially. So, or, these are educational materials. So how do you see yourself fit to write something that's a little more entertainment intensive, so I think it's that's where the gruel starts, to establish your skills in the fields that you want to eventually. Like, I realized after years of writing for kids that it was a great experience. It is a different kind of grind. It is very grueling also in its own way. It's a different challenge, but I wanted to move on to fiction, which was more broad and not limited to a certain audience. And so it's taken a while. I think some people, like, I took a sabbatical and that helped to sort of sharpen my skills. But in terms of boxing, yeah, it does happen a lot. So I think what you can do is, over the years, if you've written something that you're really passionate about, then a producer might look at that work and not pick that up or option it for production. But based on what they see, they might be like, okay, you do also seem to have a knack at writing, say, mystery or suspense or a thriller. And so we have this show that is also a thriller. Would you be interested in giving that a shot? So it again comes back to that, like, to get out of the box, you have something, you'll have to have something to demonstrate that you are good at other things, even if it's not commissioned work. To say, hey, I've written this thriller, would you like to read it? And it's a chance. I mean, it's a bit of a toss. They may or may not want to read it, but the only way is to demonstrate that and the other way out is, which some of my friends have done, is that they just gather their own resources, like very cheap resources, their cameras, their equipment, and just shoot a short film that they write, and they want to treat it in a certain way to demonstrate their vision. And sometimes that helps, like, oh, this is a great piece of work. Like, this is something like what we're looking for, So you have to constantly, like at any other job, I guess, you have to constantly work at your skills and have something to show for it, because talk can only take you so far. You can socialize, you can meet people, but ultimately they'll be like, so what have you done? And that can be a very daunting question,
Correct. Now, I remember auditioning for one of your projects in the film and television course, which
Yes.
which you guys ejected me to my face. I was very depressed after that, but I see your point in having these passion projects going in. And what is it about, keeping it alive, especially when, sometimes you don't always get the projects you want. Sometimes the pandemic is one big example where everything shut down, or even in the current scenario in the US, where the complete, they shut down basically any type of filming, right, for a couple of months. So how do you really keep that passion alive in yourself and start doing things that you're really interested in?
I'd say, again, it comes back to relationships. So once you've spent a little time in the industry, making connections, making friends, also, like, I think it sounds a little philosophical, but you're in this job for a reason, which is that you really like writing. I mean, that is a given. If you don't like writing and you're just doing it for the optics because you want to be seen as a writer, then you are more likely not to succeed. So you have to get your, pardon my French, but you have to get your ass on your desk every day, whether you have commissioned work or not, whether you've been rejected or not, to keep practicing your craft, because ultimately that's what will count. That's what will take you far. So during the pandemic, when I had producers for certain projects in the US, but nothing could move forward, how I kept it alive was to keep writing different iterations, because I was like, now the world is at a standstill. We don't know when we're going to go out and actually make something, or when the money is going to start coming in. But I am definitely going to keep writing every day for a certain amount of hours, and I would make sure that I stayed connected to the acting students that I've known, or the other actors that I know. And because everyone had so much time and they also wanted something to do, if you're not shooting, what do actors do? So we would come together at least once or twice a month and just read pages that I'd written. They would read them out dramatized, and that kept the craft alive. Not only the craft, but also like the conversation about the project, because some of those actors are very well connected. They're represented by agents, managers, they know producers. And that's how word spreads about your project. Like, let's say a producer says, oh, I'm looking for a political drama set in India with an American connection, and then one of your actor friends can be like, oh yeah, hey, I know a guy who's writing something like that. Would you be interested in reading? I can put you in touch with him. That's how I think a lot of the projects got into the mix, because the conversation stayed alive through the pandemic. So I think you have to keep writing, you have to keep talking about it. There are a lot of free forums online, which I can list later, where you can put out your unproduced scripts. You have to protect them first, obviously, but after you've done the registration and everything, you can put them out for a lot of hungry producers, studio executives who are looking for new projects, So keep writing, keep talking about your projects, and make as many friends as you can in the industry. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned, about putting yourself out there, because that also puts you in a space where you start getting feedback and inputs. And because you're in a creative space sometimes, and because we do a lot of creative work, and anything you write, whether it is even for a corporate film, it comes from a space of, that this is mine. So how do you keep your, that feedback, like it has to be pure, right? So how do you respond to that?
So I think that's one of the first things that you learn when you start writing for money, is that let's say that it's a commission project so something that's essentially fiction. Your style might not always match what is required of you. Your ideas might not align with the objective for that particular piece. But then you have to make that distinction that this is not essentially, I'm talking in terms of commissioned work, that this is not essentially something that I authored, but you have to find your voice in it. Like, okay, they need something, they're asking me to do something because they have a certain objective in mind. So how can I keep that objective in mind and still find my own style in it, So it's not always easy. Sometimes, on the other hand, when it's your work, you're authoring it, there's someone backing your project, they essentially agree with your idea, they've liked it, that's why they've put in the money. But it can also mean that they don't entirely agree with how your idea will do for their business, because for them it's also an investment. So then you have to sort of compromise a little bit in terms of, okay, like I can kill some of my darlings, but then you have to draw a line. Like, if they change this part of the plot, I am out of the project. Like, you have to decide what that compromise is for you. Like, they can't mess with my plot, they can't mess with my characters, they can't mess with my settings, but I can maybe tone down the comedy. I can maybe make it more dramatic if they want. I can maybe set it another place if it doesn't affect my story. So those very calculated risks, compromises are sometimes necessary. Sometimes you're lucky that the producer entirely trusts you with your vision, and they'll just but you have to learn to take a note, because sometimes people are right and writers' egos can sometimes become, because you've worked hard at it. You don't want people to sort of tear it apart without giving you ample reasons. So I would say, when you're taking a note, don't start defending yourself immediately. Like, take a day or two to reflect on the notes that you've gotten, put your work in front of you and see what works for you. And then if you really feel like putting up a fight and saying, no, I considered your note, but the point I was trying to make was XYZ. If you can make them see that, then you've sort of won the battle. If not, you decide what the compromise is for you. So, but I'm just saying, like, it's very difficult to take a note that doesn't work in your favor. It is daunting to hear, oh, what you've written isn't working, isn't funny enough, isn't dramatic enough, nothing's happening in your story. That kind of feedback is sometimes, it seems daunting, but if you honestly sit down, after a day, you might see things that they're right about. So I would say, don't act out of instinct immediately when you're taking a note. Just say, okay, I need some time to reflect on this, I'll get back. So that's, I think, how, but it takes a lot of thick skin, which you develop after a certain time. In the beginning, you might be very vocal and defensive.
Any project of your own where the feedback has really made a difference, good or bad?
Absolutely. I have been writing I'm trying to develop a mini series set in India, which has an American connection for years now. And initially it was very contained. It was a very few characters, very little happening. It got attention at a lot of contests. I won a lot of prize money and, like, a lot of queries from agents and managers. But when I took it out into film school and shared it around the table with other students and peers and teachers and instructors who are also working in the industry, they started to give me it was very daunting feedback at the end. They're like, we need a bigger world for this. Like, the canvas is so small. You're really limiting yourself to the kind of people who want to invest in this. And so I slowly started to expand. Initially, I was like, they don't get my material. Like, this is an intimate piece, and I don't care if, someone I will put in my own money at some point in my career and get this made the way I want to. But then I stopped, and then I started to really pick apart every point that would come up during the feedback sessions. And I started really, there's absolutely scope to expand the universe, make it more accessible. And it's a good thing to reach out to a larger audience. If more people can connect to your material, it's a bonus. So I found myself that I was holding it back for no reason. And so then I started to expand that world of the series, and it just actually gave me more episode ideas than there existed. And it helped me come up with much more stronger, more dramatic, more cohesive sort of ideas for the first episode, the pilot, and that sort of became the blueprint for the rest of the series, and that also got more investors interested, because they were like, oh, there's a very interesting character that, a lot of people will relate to, and now it's set in a place that's kind of relevant, and there's interesting things happening in the background that people will relate. So it became bigger and bigger and bigger, but the big note was make it bigger, which I was very hesitant to take at the start, but it actually benefited my story in a way that I started to enjoy.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the idea, coming up with new ideas also takes a little bit of a thought process, right? It's a little bit of a journey, so to speak. And I've spent this a space with you in the room in XIT, and I've seen how you curated that space. I didn't think of putting up curtains, but you put up curtains. So it's things like that. So how important is the space around you when you're doing creative work to actually come up with good ideas? Does the space play a part? And if it does, how do you curate the space around you?
Yeah, I mean, space absolutely does matter, and not just for writing, but in the way you think, in the way you feel. Obviously, the space around us really affects us. But I also understand that it's not always possible for everyone with their constraints to really set aside a budget or a space where they live to sort of cordon themselves off for the rest of the day and be like, oh, this is my sacred space, and I'm going to work here and, find my voice or whatever and practice my craft. But at the very least, I think it's very important to find a corner, at least where you live, which is only dedicated to work. And again, like I was saying before, because you're in this business because you like the craft, you enjoy writing. So obviously a huge part of that is being inspired by other movies, writers, directors. So I would say, like, it doesn't take anything to just surround yourself with images, quotes from your favorite people, your favorite creators, and find that space where you sort of read, write, just muse. It's also very important, equally important, to step away from the space that you're working in sometimes, because it really, like, our body works in different ways. Sometimes you need a different chemical balance, and it's really important to step away from your space. But in terms of like creating that space, it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be expensive, but just a corner that you like spending time in. I think that's how I would put it, with your favorite things, so that you feel like you're doing something. You're at play. You're as much at play as you are at work. I think that's what's very important, because sometimes when you're doing commissioned work for other people, it's not always, you won't always be as passionate about it as something that you have originally created. So just to have that space to say, okay, here's where I go to have fun and write, if you can associate a space like that where you live, like that's all you need.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you stay, inspired and constantly aware of what's happening around you? How do you get that inspiration consistently? I mean, getting inspiration is one thing when you go and see, beautiful art, or, you read something inspirational. But to consistently stay inspired, is there any technique or process that you've used?
I think, have new experiences as much as you can. And that doesn't necessarily mean traveling. Traveling is great. I mean, everyone will tell you, most people will tell you that it really puts things in perspective. You observe more, and you observe new things. I think the key is observation. Like, you have to enjoy, as a writer, I think it's very important to enjoy observing things. So that could mean that you're in public transport, you're out at a mall, you're out at a park, you're visiting a monument, just to observe the air, the people, their mannerisms, what they're up to. sometimes you'll notice a very interesting, eccentric person who might inspire a whole new universe, a storyline in your head about where they're coming from, what they're up to, what could be their conflict, what they're doing in that place. And then you can join the dots. Or I think one other thing that a lot of writers do, and I do sometimes, like if you follow the news every day, I'm not talking about the big headlines, but sometimes there are these little curious incidents that seem that are intriguing or mysterious that you can build upon. Like I had this project that I put in cold storage for now because someone else beat me to it. But there was this professor from Aligarh who was suspended for his orientation, and it was such an interesting story because he was found dead in his residence just days after he won a case in court. And that film eventually became Aligarh with Manoj Bajpayee and Rajkumar. And it's very interesting that I came across this little piece in the newspaper when the death first happened. I was like, this is something I would really like to pursue. And I was talking to people from the university and the professor's friends for years. I even met the rickshaw driver in the story. But where I went wrong was perhaps that I took so much time to sort of mull it over instead of actively putting the project out there. So I think you have to be very aware of what's going around you. And I don't just mean current affairs, like observing people, incidents, places. It really helps because those are the scraps that you gather in your head in ways that are hard to explain, and they become stories.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I remember meeting a painter and an artist a couple of years back, actually many years back, and he told me that all he does sometimes through the day is observe people's noses. And he says that inspires him. He says just the shapes of the noses, the way the light falls on it, and he can tell a person's ethnicity sometimes just by looking at the nose. So interesting. I mean, like, observation and just looking at the small things can make such a big difference. So
yeah. I mean, it's the details that make the story. Yeah.
True. So I mean, I open this now to Q&A from people who have joined the call. We have a couple of people here, but as people are getting warmed up to asking the question, I'll ask this to the audience. But is there any script or any piece of writing where you really, any movie that has been made that you think is some of the best writing that you have ever seen or read?
Do you mean a specific format or in general?
In general.
Yeah, I would say I'm a big fan of Paul Thomas Anderson's work. He's a writer-director, American writer-director who, he's really expanded on his body of work over the years from very small films, but he has a certain style. He's very good at pacing. There's a way in his characters are very eccentric, and there's always a sort of curveball at the end, something very, very unexpected in the third act. So yeah, that he also and even keeping to that style, he has really touched so many diverse story ideas and topics over the years that it really constantly amazes me. I think closer home in our industry, I really love Vishal Bhardwaj's work because I also really enjoy adapting material, existing IP. And he does that really well in placing something that someone else has written in another part of the world in our context, like, his adaptations of all the Shakespearean works and Ruskin Bond. And I lately hear he's done a series based on some of Agatha Christie's work. But the way he embraces the material really in, sort of processes it and presents it for a different audience is quite, is amazing, So those are, I think, just off the top of my head, these are two people whose work I really, and I've read their scripts in like bound form, and I really enjoyed the craft in the way that sort of mapped out the story and dialogue on paper. So as a writer, that was very interesting to me, that they knew what they were doing,
Okay. We have Niharika. Niharika, you can unmute and ask your question.
Sure.
Okay. Hi, Paras.
Hi.
I just have I want to ask something around what I've experimented with. So basically there's this writer and
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker that I was speaking to, and he told me about this graph that usually writers follow. Like, you
God.
expose the
Mm,
protagonist, and there's a high, then there's a low,
mm,
and how, he said that every story, every movie, good movie or series you see follows that graph.
mm,
So he asked me to notice it. So
mm.
now when I watch a movie or a series, I try to notice it. But in movies I'm able to do that, but in terms of, like, series, I'm not able to visualize that. So is that something that you follow when you're writing, or writers usually follow, or is that something that just comes naturally?
Yeah, I mean, a certain structure, I would say, is important, because otherwise there's no end to how much you can keep writing. Sometimes you find the story on the page, and then you work backwards and see how many acts there are, where your story, where the conflict begins, what the stakes are. But I would say it's not so cut and dry. I've done what you've also done. When I came out of film school, when I started watching things, we were told things like, oh, the first big change in their normal world, their everyday world, usually comes in around the 12 or 15-minute mark. Sometimes that would really be apparent even in a series, like, oh, now something big is happening, and this guy will really have to step out of his comfort zone to start working on this change that's troubling him. But sometimes it didn't happen for a whole episode. You're just establishing character. So I think, for me, I would broadly say, if you have a very strong beginning, middle, and I think it's just 3 acts ultimately. That's just it. The kind of call to action, the first call to action for the character, and the ultimate resolution, and the sort of false ending where you think everything has ended, but then they bounce back. Those narratives work for a lot of projects, but for some projects, it's okay to experiment, as long as your material has a compelling character to watch, who unfolds over time, and he has challenges that he has to overcome, he or she. And there are other interesting characters that he interacts with or is in conflict with. Then you're okay. I think just following a 3-act structure is important, and the rest can be a little variable. You can have a little fun with that.
Oh, got it. Also, one more question, again, around something that I have been trying to experiment with.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to write something, but the thing is that when I'm actually speaking to people, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to somebody, then, and like, in that brainstorming session, I'm able to come up with, okay, what next, what happens to this person next, what happens in the story. But when I'm actually trying to write it, then those ideas don't come to me that naturally. So any
Mm-hmm.
suggestions for that?
I think, yeah, I think I face that too, in a sense that sometimes it's also that you don't like what you're writing. Like, you start judging your own writing when you're putting it on the page, and sometimes I think it's just a matter of time. Sometimes you might not succeed in finding those elements in your story when you sit down. So I think just keep a note of all the things that are going on in your head. So I always, every time I have a thought for my character or a certain point in the story that I'm stuck at, I immediately put that thought down on, like a post-it, or if I'm not around my desk, I'll make a note on my phone. And then later I'll just put these scraps together, and my solution usually comes from putting those scraps together. Like, something will emerge. So I would say just be a little less hard on yourself, and let the bad writing happen first, because if you don't go through that, then you won't get to what you're actually looking for, whether it's the first conflict point, or whether it's a character trait, or anything of that sort. So just, yeah, you have to be patient. I guess it's difficult, and it's especially difficult if you're doing it for someone else and you're under a deadline. Then the best way is to, if you're in that situation, then just call up your producer or writing partner, whoever it is, to brainstorm. I think that's another thing. If you have other friends who are writers or are interested in writing, or who you share ideas with, bouncing things off, as in any other business, it really helps. You might hit upon something that you have thought of but haven't really consciously paid attention to.
Yeah. I think currently the stage I'm in, I mean, that helps for me, like
Mm,
bouncing off ideas with a
Yeah.
fellow
Because in
writer.
situation, sometimes you will just keep talking to yourself and you'll keep hitting the same roadblocks. So someone,
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. I mean, it sort of comes naturally that you write something and then you judge it and you're like, okay, chuck it.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to be patient, even if you fail. If you feel like you fail, first of all, failure is objective. So even if you subjective, even if you fail, you feel like you're failing, like just be patient with yourself, especially if it's something that you are writing on your own and nobody else is involved. That's the luxury. You can take your time with it, just be patient. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a question from Partha. Partha, I will ask this on your behalf. He's asked, how has the new AI-enabled applications to original creations? Are these applications becoming a threat to original creations and more specifically to a professional career? So, opinion or take on the issue.
Okay, so it was a huge threatening issue during the Writers Guild of America strike recently. Of course, it was more to do with the pay package and residuals and profits and things like that. But this was one of the bones of contention during this whole conflict, which was if our jobs are replaced by an app or a software or an intelligent device, artificially intelligent device that can frame words for you and even set a tone. In my personal use, I just tried ChatGPT like very recently, and I realized that while it is very succinct, it really is very precise in wording something, whether it's a story or a letter or an email, whatever that might be. It does capture the essence, but what I feel it more often than not lacks is the sort of emotive quality of a piece of writing. So I personally feel that it's going to be, I don't think it's going to replace us anytime soon in terms of creating stories that work, because I do see limitations that I can't express right now in using AI. They don't, what the AI presents as a piece of writing doesn't have that range of all the emotional spectrum or the avenues of thinking that a human mind can go to, with the complexities. I felt like it was very sort of, there were 4 or 5 pillars that, it was drawing from, and it did feel very dry to me, but maybe that's personal. Maybe a studio executive might feel differently. So it's very up in the air right now, but I don't think it's a threat right now. I mean, the whole writer's strike, where they reached a compromise now, wouldn't have happened if the AI was so reliable. There was a threat at some point where the producers put it out as like an intimidation tactic. Like, there's always AI. Like, writers can go out to work, they can lose their homes. We don't care. If they're going to be that adamant, if they want to play dirty, we always have AI. But eventually, they had to get the writers back in. And reach a compromise. So as of now, I don't think it's going to be that. It's not going to gobble up our work and our skills, but yeah, it is a looming threat that we have to constantly revisit, I think.
Okay. Shweta, you had your hand raised a couple of minutes back.
Yeah. So I have a question regarding the you spoke something about writers being very bucketed or characterized, or how should I put it, in terms of screenwriters and write in India versus in abroad versus in India. Is that the case? Did I get you correct?
Yeah. What I meant was also that there it's more format. So if you're
more format, yes.
Yeah.
So my question to you, Paras, is like when it comes to getting more work, or expanding the professional spectrum, so to say, if you are soliciting a career in this area, would it make sense, or would you advise writers to have versatility to get more work, or to be very format driven to get more work in India? Like, that's my question to you, because while it is at times, I believe that every individual goes through that, going with the flow of the comfort zone. ये क्रैक कर लिया है, ये मुझे बहुत बढ़िया आता है, तो उसी पे रेपिटेशन करना, while it is good, but at some point in time you may hit the dead end, so to say. What is your advice?
That's a very good question, very insightful, because I spoke a little bit about it earlier, which is that it takes a while to even understand what you really like to write, and once you do that, because you also have to pay your bills, you have to sustain a career monetarily.
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to take, I have done content writing and SEO optimization at some point in my career also to keep paying the bills, because it's there is this threat of like, what if they find a better writer, what if we have creative differences and they sort of, I'm not part of the team anymore, that happens all the time. But I think once you know your genres, it is a very good idea to try your hand at different genres on your own. But I'm saying even within that, even if you're versatile in terms of like the different kinds of writing that you experiment with, somewhere there will be a certain characteristic style that you have, which will be very much your voice. I think it's very important to find that voice which will set you apart from other writers. Like you might currently, let's say, just as an example, if you're good at writing comedy, but you want to try your hand at drama and mystery. Now, just because you're experimenting with drama and mystery doesn't mean that you can't bring a little bit of humor into that as a comedy writer. That will make it more textured, more interesting, perhaps more appealing than the other mystery writers who are plainly writing mysteries, So I think just to sharpen those skills, find out what you're really good at and bringing that into everything possible, But to answer your larger question, it really helps to have a body of work that shows you're good at several different kinds of things. But at the same time, I would
like, if I get an opportunity to work abroad, will this versatility be a disadvantage?
No, I don't think it will be. No, it won't be. Because ultimately they'll be like, the big question will be, how good are they at fiction? That. And then you can take your time to understand, oh, am I a half-an-hour writer or am I a 1-hour writer, or am I a feature writer, like that? And you can be all, but some people choose to put one ability forward, because sometimes it helps when agents, managers, studio executives are looking for something very specific. Then it actually helps to box yourself. Like, let's say you're good at comedy, but you're good at longer format. But let's say an agent is looking for a half-hour comedy writer, but you can do it. Then you can put yourself out as a half-hour comedy writer and offer them a sample that shows you can. But like I was saying earlier, it's really important. Once you want to try something, just build on a sample as quickly as possible.
Can I ask a few more follow-up questions, Ruben? Like, I have one or two.
Sure, we're out of time, but okay, no problem.
Oh,
go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. The second follow-up question was that since in India we have a screenwriter different and a writer different, what if we identify whom we gel with around our style and make a team of sorts? Does that work in your industry? I have no idea. So
I know it absolutely does. In fact, the latest Bollywood movie that I'm writing for a very big studio, I wish I could name them at this point, but I'm under an NDA. But I'm doing it with a writing partner, and
okay.
And we go back many years. She was more of a performer, I was more of a writer, but then she started to foray into writing. She assisted many big directors as an AD at various levels. So she made lots of contacts, and then she came across this producer, and they were like, we're looking for a writer who can execute this romantic comedy with a family angle, and my writing partner got in touch with me saying, would you be interested in doing this? She's like, because I have no idea how to write a screenplay. I have seen the format, I have played with it, but I don't think I'm a screenplay writer yet. You are. So how about, we get this project, and then I do the outline because I'm better at that. I'm better at doing the larger outline and the story points. And then you really do the heavy lifting when it comes to the actual screenplay writing on the software, like the final draft with the screenplay and dialogue, partnered. And because she's in Bombay, it really helps. So we've divided the work. We've become a team, and we're known for being a team because she attends all the face-to-face meetings mostly. I try and make it a point to talk to the producers every now and then myself also, but she does most of the talking, the presenting, and she's really working hard on the outline, which I'm also sort of helping her out with. But the deal is that once this is through, I will take over the screenplay, and then she will give me her opinion on how the screenplay is going. So we work as a team. She's good at something, I'm good at something, but we both found our strengths, and we're working to our strengths, combining it. So writer duos are very common in both the industries, actually. Yeah, so that's a good way to go.
And one last question is, like, when you're writing, does the language affect the thought process?
Yeah, actually, this is another great question. Yeah, it actually does. So when I'm writing for, say, an American production, it really and there's a science to it. Actually, I'm not a linguist, so I can't give you the specifics, but I've read pieces where it says the language and the tone that you think in really informs how you're writing. Like when I'm writing American pieces, the humor is very different. It's drier, it's more ironic, it has a different bite. But when I write say Hindi comedy, it is very different because I've experienced most of my life in India, obviously. So I bring something else to it, which I have experienced. So it depends on how you relate to that language, how close you feel to that language. It really does affect.
Paras, like with India getting exposed to all that Firang content, and India audience getting educated to this dry humor and whatever the attributes of the other world thing is, पहले ये नहीं था अवेलेबल, तो हमें सिर्फ हिंदी मूवी समझ में आती थी और जब हम ये देखते तो हमारे सर के ऊपर से जाता था. तो अब चूंकि हम एजुकेट हो गए, हमने नार्कोस ऑफ द वर्ल्ड देख लिया, ये सब देख लिया है, तो अब जब हिंदी मूवी में कोई इस तरह का क्वालिटी लेके आता है तो हम समझते हैं. तो डज इट ऑल्सो लाइक when they say कि ये एक डिफरेंट सेट ऑफ ऑडियंस के लिए है, तो ऐसा भी मतलब इवॉल्वमेंट हुआ है क्या इंडस्ट्री में?
आई थिंक सो और मैं ये भी कहूंगा कि इंग्लिश अभी भी थोड़ी प्रॉब्लमेटिक है. अगर आप बॉलीवुड की पिक्चरें देखोगे, अभी भी जब थोड़ी सी इंग्लिश आ जाती है ना, कभी कभी थोड़ा सा ऑकवर्ड भी लगता है सुनने में. you're like, I haven't heard anyone talk like that recently. It sounds a little stilted, a little bit clunky here and there, because a lot of the writers are also, some writers are very, very sort of indigenous. They've spent their entire lives in India. They come from small towns in UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. So they will bring something to it, and then maybe they'll get another writer or a dialogue writer to write in the English parts, and those people have different backgrounds. So last में जाके थोड़ी सी खिचड़ी बन जाती है. But to answer your question, yeah, I think abhi exposure to bahut zyada hai. There are a lot of American producers who are looking for content that is set in India. Netflix pe bahut aisi series hain, horror series especially, which are Indian stories, but they're produced by a very big American horror producers. So ye abhi exchange kafi ho raha hai. So इससे language में भी फर्क पड़ेगा. Like the kind of people they hire. Some people are very good at stories, so they'll write a great story. An American might actually write that story, and then a Hindi dialogue writer comes on board. So ये थोड़ा balance कभी-कभी off हो जाता है. But I think the main thing for a writer to put out as in your profile is that you can actually tell a story effectively. बाकी सारी चीजें 19-20 adjust हो जाती हैं बाद में.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paras. I mean, a lot of your experience and the way you have told us about how to get into script writing and how challenges that you have faced and generally people face in this creative field has been very, very insightful. I got to know a little bit more about what you've done in the last couple of years. We've not been in touch. And I don't know what else to say. I think you've done a beautiful job of explaining what a screenplay writer does.
Well, I'm glad I could do that for all of the people who are looking to bolster their careers. And I'm in that process too. I'm in no way like fully established. There are a lot of struggles coming up and current as well. So it was really great sharing that, because saying it out loud, sometimes you realize you get a lot of insights into your own process. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm absolutely appreciative of it.